On our last two broadcasts, we talked about Mystery Babylon and spent the time to define this mystery. We called it Unraveling the Mystery of Babylon. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the burning of Babylon.
And J.R., this culminates the times of the Gentiles. We've had the times of the Gentiles ever since ancient Babylon, and we've had the Babylonian mystery religion that spread all throughout the earth, and it became like a disease covering the whole earth. Well, Revelation speaks of the end of Babylon. It comes crashing down, ending the times of the Gentiles. The Lord steps out of the heavens and sets up the kingdom. And that's what we're going to be discussing today on the basis of the merchants of the earth who comprise commercial Babylon and their reaction to this whole thing.
Yes, and we have determined that this Babylon involves the entire world, and I think we can convince you of that on today's program. This is a map of the eastern seaboard of the United States put out in the recent issue of National Geographic's magazine, and it shows all the way from Massachusetts and the cities to the north in Boston down through New York and right on down to Washington, D.C. And the fascinating thing about this is it calls it megalopolis. Now, this is a term that's taken from the Greek. Megalopolis means a great city.
Right, megalopolis. What this means is that Boston and Hartford, Connecticut, New York City, down through Philadelphia, down to Washington, D.C., essentially one great big city, which the editors of National Geographic chose to call megalopolis.
Yes. Now, we use this by way of illustration to describe to you what we feel Babylon is going to be. It's not one central location, but it is all of the cities of all the nations of the world. Basically, that's Mystery Babylon. It is a great city when the world has become a global village.
Yes.
And the fascinating thing about the burning of Babylon here is that it lies right in the heart of the Battle of Armageddon, and we're going to talk about that in detail today. Let's go back. Let's go back to the original burning of the city of Rome under Nero.
Yeah.
This must be what gave the inspiration for, or at least the metaphoric analysis here that John gives in the book of Revelation. When he talks about the burning of Babylon, he must be making a reference to the burning of Rome, because while Nero fiddled, Rome burned, and Nero quoted passages from the burning of Troy. And this was all blamed on the Christians. And because of that, the Christians were arrested and executed. The Apostle Paul had his head cut off. This is a beheading, Gary, and I think, you know, when it talks about those who refuse to take the mark of the beast, they'll have their heads cut off. I think John is referring back to the beheading of Paul.
He's talking about martyrdom under a false religious system, basically, and Paul, the beheading of Paul, was truly a signal event in the life of the early church.
And what this says to me is it's a metaphor of the future.
Yeah.
Because we're not trying to belittle the prophetic implication of this. What we're trying to do is show the importance of the prophetic implication of this as he uses the first century Christian bashing and the persecution against the early church, and showing that it's going to be done all over again in the last days. Nero was their Antichrist back then.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that he's referring to the same thing under Nero then is going to happen again.
What we might call this giant conglomeration of the last days, New Rome. In fact, people speak of the revived Roman Empire.
Yes.
The Bible calls it Mystery Babylon the Great. It started in Babylon, and it grows by the time of Revelation to cover the whole earth. I'd like to review something we've been talking about. Ezekiel 27 sets the tone for this whole discussion. And Ezekiel speaks of the merchants of Tarshish. Ezekiel 27:12, Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kind of riches. We had a system of traders by sea. Started off in the 9th century BC. These were the Phoenician traders. And by the 5th century BC, in the days of the greatness of Babylon, the Phoenician traders carried wares all over the whole earth, and the merchant law that they operated under operated on a system of credit, and also, J.R., it operated on a system of law that did not owe its allegiance to any country. It was its own law, the law of the merchant. And it was combined with the worship of Baal and Ishtar. So together, we have a system of commerce and trading under a false system of worship. Those two are woven together, and they go all the way through the Bible until at last we see their destruction in Revelation chapters 17 and 18.
Yeah. And so basically this Mystery Babylon is a commercial venture. It is a commercial Babylon.
Yeah.
Oh yes, it is involved in a religion as well, because these ancient mariners of the past, the merchants of Tarshish, carried their religion to the various countries where they docked, and the various ports where they offloaded their goods and unloaded the products that would be taken off to another port. And so by this they were able to spread this religion of Mystery Babylon. And so we can see every pagan society, including the Indians of the North, Central, and South America, worship the sun, the moon, and the stars.
How true.
Fascinating.
Now, J.R., when we get to Revelation, these merchant traders with their merchant law become Babylon the Great. Of course, Mystery Babylon the Great, the false religion, the mother of harlots, accompanied by commercial Babylon, a system of buying and selling and trading which feeds the wealthy and deprives the laborer of his hire. It's an evil system. God finally judges it. But what's interesting is that, for example, in Revelation 16, verse 19, in the Greek, the city is referred to as the great city, and in Greek that is polis, megali. Polis, megali. And in English that becomes megalopolis.
Yes.
Great city. And I think that the intent here is to describe a conglomerate city. That is, just as it happened on our own East Coast, where Boston, Washington, and New York become one great city, so it's happening globally. The world is being attached together electronically, patched together.
Yeah.
Satellites, global television, global trade, and by the way, I should mention global banking and money.
Yes, which is at the heart of this thing.
It certainly
is.
is.
This is Mystery Babylon. Also, I think this must be a reference to an population explosion, because there are more people in the world today than there have ever been before. In 1960, there were only 2 billion, a little over 2 billion people in the world. Today, there are over 5 billion. It's moving on towards 6 billion in just a few short years. And it's kind of interesting to me that it took 5 years for the last billion people to be born. 5 years for 1 billion people to be born. We have indeed arrived at the megalopolis of history, the global village.
Indeed. Now, J.R., in Ezekiel 27, the merchants of Tarshish are judged by God. And in the 27th verse of Ezekiel 27, the day of thy ruin, speaking of the day of the ruin of the merchants of Tarshish, is spoken of. And it says this, the suburbs shall shake at the sound of the cry of thy pilots, and all that handle the oar, the mariners, all the pilots of the sea, shall come down from their ships. They shall stand upon the land, and shall cause their voice to be heard against thee, and shall cry bitterly, and shall cast up dust upon their heads, and they shall wallow themselves in ashes. Well, J.R., the language continues. I could read several more verses, but you get the idea. And it says here in 27:35 and 36, all the inhabitants of the isles shall be astonished at thee, and their kings shall be sore afraid. They shall be troubled at their countenance. The merchants among the people shall hiss at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt be any more. The death of the merchants of Tarshish.
Yeah.
Prophesied by Ezekiel, but what strikes me is this is the language of Revelation chapter 18.
When he says anymore, that means this is the end of it. And so that has to bring us down to the concluding days of the world system as we have arrived today. I think we are there when we are about to see this global economic system put together, but it will last only for a short time. And these merchants of Tarshish will see their doom.
Now, J.R., let me ask you a question here. And I think this is the next logical development at this point. We know that the merchants of Tarshish, that is, the commercial Babylon, is to be destroyed. And the next question would be, well, what general time period? Or when does this all happen? And is it connected to anything else that we see in the Bible?
Yes. And for that, I think we can go to the pages of Revelation chapter 16. There we are. The vials of wrath. When God pours out his vials of wrath, we can see all of this thing culminating. For example, a disease, the first angel pours out his vial upon the earth. There fell a grievous sore upon men. So here is a worldwide disease. We don't know if it's a flesh-eating disease or not.
That's in the news these days, isn't it?
Certainly could be. It says it falls upon those who have the mark of the beast and upon those who worship his image. The second vial is poured out upon the sea, and it becomes as the blood of a dead man. The sea is polluted. And the third vial is poured out upon the rivers, and they are polluted, and the fountains of water. The fourth vial is poured out upon the sun. Men are scorched with fire. The fifth vial is poured out upon the earth and the kingdom of the beast, and his kingdom is filled with darkness. And then the sixth angel pours out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and it is dried up to prepare for the kings of the east, for a battle is about to be launched. And we see that in the following verses. We now, from verses 13 through 16, enter into a parenthetical portion, but we note here that this has been between the sixth and the seventh vial of wrath.
Yes.
And that brings us down to what I feel is the most fascinating part of this. This is when God burns Babylon. But we're talking about the whole world, aren't we?
We are. As a matter of fact, as we get into the language here of Revelation chapter 16, it's so clear that we're talking about a global system and not just a single city. Even though the term city is used, it's called a great city. Great city in Greek, megalopolis, a conglomerate
of cities.
Of cities.
Yes. Now I want you to notice in verse 16 it says, he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. So Armageddon begins here in chapter 16. It concludes in chapter 19 with the second coming of Christ. And in chapters 17 and 18, right in the middle of this battle of Armageddon, Mystery Babylon is destroyed. Which means it is a worldwide war. It is a global conflagration, and it deals with fire. Must be something of a nuclear holocaust.
It's done supernaturally with pouring out of the seventh vial. J.R., in the 19th verse of chapter 16, we read this, and the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Here we really have the language that tells us this is a global event.
Yeah, this is it. Here is the unraveling of the mystery. Men for centuries have thought that Babylon was a single city, and we've wondered, where is it? Is it on the banks of the Euphrates? Is it Rome? Is it New York, Washington, D.C., Paris, London? Where is this great city? This verse tells you where this great city is. And it says, the great city was divided into three parts. Gary, those three parts have to be, and we get this from the original Greek, if you want to make reference to it, has to be the three ethnic strains of the human race. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I guess they call them Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid.
Yeah, technically speaking, divided into races, but in general, the Earth was divided into 3 ethnic groups, shall we put it that way. And we have that right here, where the city, the great one, is divided into 3 parts, and the Greek says, and the cities, poleis, of the nations, ton ethnon, fell.
There it is.
Ethnon in the Greek, and it comes right down to us in English as ethnic.
Yes.
3, shall we say, ethnic groups.
3 ethnic groups. So the city is divided into 3 parts, 3 ethnic groups. In other words, it's the whole world. It's right. The whole world. The 3 races of humankind are about to fall under the judgment of God, and the very next words tell us exactly what this is. It says, listen, the cities, plural, of the nations fell.
Wow.
There it is. So it's not just one city. It's all the cities of all the nations. And this is a result of the Battle of Armageddon. It is the burning of Babylon. Now you see, these merchants of Tarshish over the years, over the centuries, and their offspring have been setting up this, this taking over of the world. Those who want to bring Babylon back together again.
Right.
They originally in the ancient past were the mariners who sailed the great ships across the Mediterranean and out through the Strait of Gibraltar, and they delivered cargo from one seaport to another seaport and traded, international trading. Trading of commodities, which is what the merchant banker still does today.
Yes.
Is the offspring of these merchants of Tarshish. They deal in oil. They have the oil tankers that come from the Middle East, and the whole world depends upon imports. You go down to your local store and buy a shirt. It may have been produced in Hong Kong.
Absolutely.
You buy toys made in Indonesia,
Taiwan. Yeah. But J.R., what's interesting to me is that these ships you're talking about fly under a neutral flag. Even today, the big freighters, the big oil tankers will carry neutral registry, such as Liberian registry. And this has been true literally since the merchants of Tyre were considered neutral. That is, they had a merchant law that transcended all the local laws. And their goddess was Mithra, the woman. She was originally shown with rays coming out of a crown around her head. She was called the goddess of light, the goddess also of contract and fellowship, or friendship. Contract being good faith between you and me. And in the 3rd century, Diocletian declared statues of Mithra to be protectors of the Roman Empire. And these statues then came to represent banking in the Middle Ages. Mithra was the goddess of the London banking center. London was founded by the Romans as a banking center and has existed from that day until this. And under, shall we say, the protectorate of Mithra, a woman whom you find statues of this woman all over the world in the strangest places. But the idea of contracts and trust or friendship, that's the foundation of merchant law, contract merchant law. The global merchants of the sea sailing under the goddess Mithra. And if that isn't a beautiful picture of Revelation 17 and 18, I don't know what is.
Yeah. And you know, in recent years, we've had the development of the Trilateral Commission, tri meaning 3. Basically, it means that the world is divided up into 3 parts.
Yes, it does.
And these trilateralists from Europe and the Western Hemisphere and the Far East are getting together to establish tariff treaties. We have GATT, the GATT treaty today. We have NAFTA. And this is their final attempt at a global village, putting together a one world monetary system The fascinating thing is they will require a mark in the hand or the forehead before you can buy or sell. This is a part of the global economic system that the merchants of Tarshish, these Babylonian merchants, Mystery Babylon, I should say, are culminating in. But it is all going to fall apart at Armageddon.
Yes,
you
it
see,
is.
they have opened Pandora's box, and what comes out will just nigh unto destroy them. That's the frustration of it all. This little utopia that they have put together is all going to fall apart in the battle of Armageddon.
And you know, John, the Revelator, practically quotes Ezekiel in Revelation 18:17. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught, and every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? Or we could insert parenthetically, what city is like this megalopolis? Yeah. And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. We could say in 1 hour the law merchant is ripped to shreds, J.R.
Yes. And what I see here, Gary, is that this worldwide war that's coming, this Armageddon war, will be so devastating to all the cities of all the nations that when the smoke clears away, nobody will be left. It will destroy everybody on the earth. It has already destroyed half of the population of the planet. When suddenly, the merchants, they throw up their hands and say, what we have worked for all these centuries is in ashes. And then the sun will turn as black as sackcloth of ashes, and the moon will turn as blood, and out of the darkened sky will come the glory. The return of the glory. That's Revelation 19. He's coming to win the battle of Gog and Magog, and if he didn't come, not one soul would survive. That's the fascinating part of it all, Gary. He says, I see heaven open. Behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him was called Faithful and True. The second coming of Jesus Christ will save the day, not only put an end to Babylon, but will save the day for humanity.